My name is Thomas Reed, and until a few months ago, my life was as ordinary as anyone's. I lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, close enough to the bustle, but far enough away to escape the noise. I worked as a project manager at a mid-sized tech company downtown. The job paid well, though it wasn't particularly exciting, and the monotony of spreadsheets, meetings, and deadlines had become a comfortable routine for me. My apartment building was old, one of those brick structures from the 1950s that had been converted into modern units, though not without its quirks. Creaking pipes, drafty windows, and the occasional blackout when the power grid strained. I didn't mind the quiet life. Most evenings I'd come home, fix myself a quick dinner, and either watch TV or read. I wasn't much of a socialite, though I had a few friends from work who'd occasionally pull me out for drinks, but for the most part, I enjoyed my solitude. It gave me time to think, to reflect on life, and in many ways, it allowed me to disconnect from the pressures of my job. My neighbor, Miss Granger, was the first sign that something was off about this place. She was an older woman, probably in her late 60s, with thinning gray hair and a hunched posture that made her appear frail. Though her sharp eyes suggested otherwise, I would often see her standing in the hallway, staring out of the small window at the end of the corridor as though she were waiting for someone or something. She barely spoke, but when she did, her voice carried an odd, haunting quality. "Be careful in there," she'd said to me once when I first moved in, her eyes fixed on my door, as if it hid some terrible secret. I'd laughed it off at the time, thinking she was just a harmless eccentric, but in hindsight, maybe she knew more than she let on. The first time I saw one of them was at work. It was a regular Tuesday afternoon, and I was sitting at my desk, going through a presentation for a meeting later that day. My colleague Marcus had just stopped by to chat about some upcoming deadlines. Marcus was the kind of guy who always had a smile on his face, no matter how stressful things got. He worked in marketing and had an easygoing way about him that made him one of the few people I enjoyed spending time with at the office. "Hey man," Marcus said, leaning against my cubicle. "You still on for that drink later? We could use a break after this week." I was about to respond when I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. A dark shape, no, a shadow, standing at the far end of the office, just behind the glass partition near the conference room. It was tall, humanoid in shape, but unnaturally still. For a moment, I thought someone from the cleaning crew was standing there, waiting for the meeting to finish. But when I turned my head to get a better look, there was nothing. "What is it?" Marcus asked, following my gaze. "Nothing," I replied, shaking it off. "Just thought I saw someone over there." He shrugged and smiled. "Long week, huh? We should definitely grab that drink." I nodded, still unsettled. The rest of the day passed without incident, though I found myself glancing around the office more frequently, as if expecting to see the shadow again. But it didn't appear, and by the time I left work, I'd convinced myself it had been a trick of the light, a reflection or something. That night, as I sat on my couch, watching the late news, I saw it again. This time, it was in my apartment, standing just outside my bedroom door. My heart skipped a beat and I froze, the remote slipping from my hand and hitting the floor with a dull thud. The figure was barely visible in the dim light of the room, more like a smudge in my peripheral vision, but it was there, unmoving, waiting. I slowly turned my head, trying to get a better look, but as soon as I did, it vanished. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty hallway, trying to rationalize what I'd just seen. Maybe I was tired, maybe I was imagining things, but deep down I knew that wasn't the case. Something had been there. The next morning, I arrived at the office, feeling more tired than usual. My sleep had been restless, plagued by strange dreams of dark corridors and shadowy figures lurking just out of sight. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even though I was alone in my apartment. When I sat down at my desk, I tried to focus on work, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the shadow I'd seen the night before. I glanced over at the corner of the office, where I'd first spotted it, but everything seemed normal. The usual chatter of keyboards, phones ringing, and quiet conversations filled the air. Still, I couldn't relax. As the day wore on, I found myself becoming more paranoid. Every time I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye, I would tense up, expecting to see the shadow again. It didn't help that Marcus had noticed my distracted behavior. "You alright, man?" he asked, leaning on the edge of my cubicle. "You've been out of it all day." I forced a smile. "Yeah, just didn't sleep well last night. Weird dreams." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Weird dreams? Maybe you've been working too hard." "Maybe," I muttered, though I knew that wasn't it. Later that afternoon, as I was finishing up some reports, I saw it again. The shadowy figure. This time it was closer, standing at the edge of my desk, just beyond the glow of my computer screen. My breath caught in my throat, and I slowly turned my head, hoping to get a better look without scaring it away. But as soon as I moved, it vanished again, leaving only the faintest hint of something wrong lingering in the air. I pushed my chair back and stood up, my heart racing. I needed to get out of the office, to clear my head. I made an excuse to Marcus about needing fresh air and hurried outside. The streets were bustling with the usual lunchtime crowd, but I felt like I was in a different world, disconnected from the reality around me. The shadowy figure had been so close this time, so real. It wasn't my imagination. Something was following me. That night, I came home feeling more on edge than ever. The shadows were following me everywhere now, at work, in my apartment, even when I went out for a walk. To try and clear my head, they never moved, never spoke, but they were always there, just at the edges of my vision, waiting. I locked the door behind me and collapsed onto the couch, rubbing my temples. I needed to figure out what was happening, but I didn't know where to start. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. What would I even say? That I was being haunted by shadow people? People would think I'd lost my mind. A knock on my door startled me, and I jumped to my feet. It was late. Too late for visitors, and I rarely had anyone over. For a moment, I thought about ignoring it, but the knock came again. Louder this time. I opened the door to find Miss Granger standing in the hallway, her frail frame casting a long shadow in the dim light of the corridor. Her sharp eyes were fixed on mine, and for the first time since I'd met her, I saw something other than disdain in her gaze. There was concern there, even fear. "You've seen them, haven't you?" she asked, her voice low and urgent. My blood ran cold. "Seen who?" "The shadows," she whispered. "They've been following you." I stared at her, my heart pounding. How could she know? "I've seen them before," Miss Granger continued, stepping closer. "They start small, just at the edges of your vision, but they get closer. They always get closer." "What are they?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She shook her head. "I don't know, but they're dangerous. If you let them, they'll drain you, piece by piece, until there's nothing left." I swallowed hard, fear settling like a heavy weight in my chest. What can I do? Miss Granger's expression darkened. "I don't know if there's anything you can do, but whatever you do, don't acknowledge them. Don't try to confront them. That only makes them stronger." After my conversation with Miss Granger, I knew I couldn't just sit around, waiting for the shadows to consume me. I had to find answers, and if no one else was going to give them to me, I'd have to figure it out myself. I spent the next day researching everything I could about shadow people, paranormal phenomena, and anything remotely connected to what I was experiencing. I scoured online forums, read articles, and even visited the library, hoping to find something, anything that could explain what was happening to me. Most of what I found was inconclusive, a mishmash of urban legends, personal accounts, and pseudoscience. Some people believed shadow figures were ghosts or spirits. Others thought they were interdimensional beings, and a few even claimed they were a form of sleep paralysis, but none of that seemed to match what I was going through. The most unsettling theory I came across was that these shadow figures were entities that fed on life energy. According to some sources, they would latch on to a person, gradually draining their vitality and soul, until the victim was nothing more than a hollow shell. The worst part? Once they had a hold on you, it was nearly impossible to get rid of them. By the time I returned to my apartment, it was already dark, and the familiar sense of dread had settled over me again. The shadows were waiting, as they always were, lingering just out of sight, but I could feel them. They were closer now, pressing in on me from all sides. I sat down at my computer, trying to distract myself with work, but my mind kept drifting back to the shadows. What if Miss Granger was right? What if these things were feeding on me, slowly draining my life away? That night, I had the worst dream of my life. In it, I was standing in the middle of my apartment, but everything was wrong. The walls were twisted, the furniture distorted, and the shadows were everywhere. They surrounded me, pressing in on me so close. I could feel their cold breath on my skin. They didn't move, didn't speak, but their presence was overwhelming. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I was trapped. In the dream, I reached out to touch one of the shadows, desperate to make sense of what was happening. As soon as my hand made contact, a searing pain shot through my body, and I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. The room still dark around me, but the shadows were there. They were always there now. I could see them, standing at the foot of my bed, watching me. Suddenly, the shadows disappeared, but I couldn't take it anymore. The next day, I called in sick to work. I couldn't focus. Couldn't think about anything but the shadows. I didn't tell Marcus or anyone else what was happening. It wasn't something I could explain over the phone, but I knew I couldn't keep running from this. I had to confront it. I spent the day preparing. I didn't know how to fight these things, but I wasn't going to let them consume me without a fight. I read about different rituals, protective symbols, anything that might help. I wasn't particularly religious, but at this point I was willing to try anything. As night fell, I sat in my apartment, waiting for the shadows to come. I could feel them pressing in on me closer than ever. The room grew colder and the lights flickered, casting long distorted shadows across the walls. This time I didn't look away. I faced them head on, refusing to give in to the fear. They didn't move, didn't speak, but I could feel their presence intensifying, like they were feeding off my energy. For what felt like hours, I sat there staring into the darkness, my heart racing, my hands trembling, but eventually something shifted. The room seemed to grow lighter, the oppressive weight of the shadows lifting, if only slightly. I wasn't free, not yet, but I had faced them, and I was still alive. It's been a week since the shadows first appeared, and they're still with me. They follow me wherever I go, lingering at the edges of my vision, waiting, but they haven't gotten any closer since that night. I don't know how long I can keep this up, but I'm determined not to let them win. Miss Granger was right. They feed on fear, on attention. The more you acknowledge them, the stronger they become. I still see them in my dreams, still feel their cold presence when I'm alone, but I've learned to live with it. I don't know if I'll ever be rid of them completely, but as long as I don't give in, as long as I don't let them consume me, I'll survive. At least that's what I kept telling myself. That night, something felt different. The air in my apartment was colder than usual. Even though it was the middle of summer, it clung to my skin, thick and damp, like the air had taken on a weight of its own. I closed the windows, checked the thermostat, but nothing seemed to make the chill go away. It was as if the walls themselves were exhaling, their cold breath seeping into every corner of the room. The shadows were there as always, hovering at the edges of my vision, never close enough to touch, but always present. Over the past few days, they had stopped moving closer, but I could sense them lingering just out of sight, waiting for me to slip up. But tonight, it was different. They felt bolder. I sat on the couch, the TV playing some mindless show I wasn't paying attention to. The volume was low, just enough to drown out the silence. My eyes flickered toward the corners of the room, watching for movement, waiting for that familiar sensation of being watched. The shadows were there, lurking, but they felt closer. It wasn't just at the edges of my vision anymore. It was deeper, like they were pressing in on me from all sides, just waiting for me to acknowledge them. I glanced at the clock. 11:45 p.m. 15 minutes until midnight. That was always when they were at their worst, as if the approaching darkness gave them strength. I rubbed my hands together, trying to shake the cold that had settled into my bones, but it was no use. The chill was inside me now. A flicker of movement caught my eye. I turned toward the hallway leading to my bedroom, my breath catching in my throat. There at the far end of the hall was one of the shadows. This time, it wasn't just a smudge in my peripheral vision. It was more solid, more defined. It stood tall, motionless, its form vaguely human but wrong in so many ways. The edges of its body seemed to blur and ripple like smoke, and I could make out no details, just a dark, formless silhouette, standing perfectly still as though it had been waiting for this moment. I froze, my heart pounded in my chest, and for a brief, horrifying moment I thought about running. But where would I go? It would follow me. It always followed me. The shadow didn't move, it just stood there, as though daring me to acknowledge its presence. The tension in the room was unbearable, the silence thick and oppressive. I could feel my muscles tense, every nerve in my body screaming for me to do something, anything, but I couldn't bring myself to move. My mind raced, trying to remember Miss Granger's words. Don't acknowledge them, don't try to confront them. That only makes them stronger. But it was too late. I had seen it, fully seen it, and it wasn't going away. Slowly, the shadow began to shift, its body undulated, rippling like a black mist, and it took a step toward me. I gasped, my heart slamming against my ribs. My breath came in ragged, uneven bursts, and I tried to focus, tried to keep my composure, but the shadow was coming closer now. Deliberately, each movement slow and deliberate. Its presence was suffocating, the air growing thicker with each passing second. I grabbed the remote, turning the volume on the TV up, trying to drown out the silence, trying to break the spell it had over me, but the shadow didn't care. The noise didn't faze it. Another step. I was shaking now, my hands clammy, my chest tight with fear. The lights in the room flickered, casting jagged, twisted shadows across the walls, amplifying the terror in my gut. I told myself to look away, to ignore it, but I couldn't. My gaze was locked on it, and I felt powerless to break free. And then I heard it, a sound, a whisper. No words, just a soft, almost imperceptible murmur like something distant, calling from the depths of a dark cave. The sound was faint, but it sent a cold rush through my veins, a terror so primal that I nearly dropped the remote. The shadow stopped, only a few feet away from me now. My eyes widened, my breath catching in my throat as I realized that it was closer than it had ever been before. I could feel its presence, like a weight pressing down on me, like something draining the very life from my body. My limbs felt heavy, my mind clouded with a fog of fear and confusion. Another whisper, this time closer. I clutched the arms of the couch, my knuckles white, my entire body trembling. The shadow loomed over me now, its form darker than any night I had ever known. I could feel it pulling at me, drawing the energy from me like a black hole, devouring the very air around me. In that moment, something snapped inside me. I had lived with this fear for too long. I had let it control me, dictate every movement, every thought, every second of my life. But I couldn't let it end this way. I couldn't let them win. With a surge of defiance, I pushed myself off the couch and took a step toward the shadow. My heart raced, my entire body on edge, but I didn't stop. I took another step, my breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps, my mind a whirlwind of panic and determination. The shadow didn't move. For a moment, I stood there, inches away from it, the cold radiating from its form seeping into my skin. I could feel its presence wrapping around me, suffocating me, draining me of everything I had left. But I didn't back down. "You don't get to take me," I whispered, my voice shaking but firm. The shadow shuddered, its form rippling like smoke in the wind. The lights flickered again, and for a brief moment I thought it might disappear, dissolve into the darkness like it had so many times before. But it didn't. Instead, it retreated. Slowly, its form began to fade, shrinking back toward the hallway, its edges blurring into the shadows that lined the walls. I watched, breathless, as it dissolved into nothingness, leaving behind only the cold, empty silence of my apartment. I stood there for a long time, my heart pounding, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The shadow was gone for now, but I knew it wasn't over. It's been a few hours since the shadow retreated, and I haven't seen it again. But the apartment still feels cold, colder than it should. The lights are on. The TV is playing, but it feels like the shadows are watching me from every corner, waiting for the right moment to return. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. The shadows have been draining me piece by piece, and I can feel it. I'm not the same person I was a week ago. I'm weaker, more tired. The weight of their presence presses on me constantly, even when they're not there. But I'm still here. I haven't given in, and that's something. As I sit here typing this, I can't help but glance at the darkened corners of the room. The shadows are still there, lingering, but they're keeping their distance for now. I don't know if I'll ever be rid of them completely, but as long as I keep fighting, as long as I don't let them consume me, I'll survive. At least I hope I will. For now, that's all I can do. Live with the shadows, face them, and try to hold on to whatever is left of me. Because I know one thing for certain. The shadows never really go away. They're always there, just waiting for the moment when I'm too weak to fight back. And when that moment comes, I'm not sure what will happen, but until then, I'll keep going, even if the shadows are always watching.